Well, I feel like I've got quite a tough session to follow here, and it's quite a swift change of direction as we return to discussing the research that we've been conducting. So anyone who was with us yesterday will understand that the work package that I lead has two components, one being the large-scale psychosocial survey that we discussed yesterday, and the second part is the games trials, which are designed to assess the effectiveness of our context-specific serious gaming interventions designed to educate young people about particular types of violence and abuse in their respective countries. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a kind of background information about the rationale behind these trials, really. So there are huge concerns amongst many researchers about the abundance of violent and sexual content in video games. And although the research isn't entirely conclusive, on the whole, playing violent video games has been associated with negative outcomes, including impulsivity, aggressive behaviours and cognitions, desensitization towards violence, and externalizing or antisocial behaviours. Where sexual content in video games is concerned, there are criticisms of game developers for producing games with sexualized avatars and portraying women in sexist or stereotypical roles, or depicting them as sex objects or trophies to be achieved through gameplay. And video games that include sexualized content, exposure or playing these games has been associated with hostile sexism, rape myth acceptance, and also attitudes that condone or normalize sexual harassment of women. So there are many concerns about the content of mainstream video games, but more recently attention has shifted to something that we refer to as prosocial video games. That is, games where the primary objective is to help or benefit another character in the game through non-violent methods. And the most comprehensive meta-analysis to date, including 98 studies, discovered that whilst violent video games increase aggressive behaviour and cognitions, prosocial games actually have the opposite effect of decreasing aggressive behaviour and aggressive cognitions. Prosocial video games have also been associated with other positive outcomes, such as the ability to regulate mood successfully, increased moral reasoning, increased empathy, and increased cooperation and willingness to help. And the positive effects of prosocial video games have been observed across diverse cultures, including the United States, the UK, Japan, Israel, amongst others. And also the positive effects have been observed amongst young people with different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. In recognition that playing carefully designed prosocial video games can have positive impacts on cognitions, effective functioning and behaviours, over the past decade we've witnessed a boom in what we refer to as a serious gaming industry. When we talk about serious games, we're referring to gaming interventions that integrate the acquisition of knowledge, skills, or prosocial attitudes and beliefs with entertainment capacity as well. And video games are increasingly being recognised as a helpful and useful educative tool. So in contrast to traditional methods of teaching, they're far more interactive, engaging and immersive, and they enable players to practice skills that can be subsequently generalised to real life. Games that involve decision making also create a sense of agency in that players have the opportunity to kind of control how the story for the characters progresses. Increasingly, serious gaming interventions are being recognised as a useful educational tool in schools and other social spaces, and we are witnessing an increase in the number of interventions that are available, and they tackle a range of different issues, from health promotion behaviours to self-efficacy to interpersonal communication skills, ostracism and social relatedness, and also cyberbullying as well. So in considering that violent games seem to have a negative impact on behaviour and cognitions, it does beg the question, whether a carefully designed, educative, pro-social gaming intervention could actually have the opposite effect by reducing forms of violence. And obviously, with the focus of our centre on gender-based violence, it begs the question whether these sorts of serious gaming interventions can reduce specific forms of violence like gender-based violence. The number of interventions that are available in this field is generally small, but we are seeing a gradual increase. And there are games that are available to address beliefs in gender bias and inequality, sexual violence and coercion, adolescent dating violence, and also intimate partner violence. Few of the current interventions have been subject to rigorous quantitative evaluation, but where these types of studies do exist, we are seeing evidence emerging that these games are capable of promoting preparedness to avoid sexual coercion, reductions in beliefs that support violence against women and girls, and also increased empathetic concern for victims. Now, as a centre, our games development team have created 4 context-specific gaming interventions. So in Uganda, the focus of the game is on child marriage. In India, gender bias, including beliefs in restricted educational opportunities for girls. Jamaica, child sexual abuse, and in the UK, adolescent dating violence. And these games are culturally specific and culturally relevant in that they contain authentic imagery and also include voice actors who speak with the appropriate accents and dialects as well, increasing the kind of authenticity of the gameplay experience. So the purpose of this particular work package is to assess the effectiveness of the serious gaming interventions in a number of different ways. Now, obviously, the games have slightly different focuses and slightly different objectives, but generally speaking, the idea is to consider whether each of these games are capable of increasing young people's knowledge and understanding of the types of behaviours that count as abuse, to facilitate prosocial attitude and behaviour change, for instance, reducing the types of beliefs that normalise or condone violence against women, girls or children, to build empathetic concern for victims of abuse, and also to empower young people to prevent abuse, for instance, through the provision of information about relevant support agencies where they can disclose abuse or seek help. And in doing so, we are also generating evidence on the effectiveness of serious gaming interventions in non-Western, low-resource countries where exposure to digital technologies is relatively limited, because most of the research that does exist has been conducted in either the States or in Europe. So in each of the 4 countries, the intention is for the trials to take place in schools. These will be facilitated by country research teams with the support of teachers. Now, to determine the effectiveness of the games, we need 2 groups in each country. Assignment to the groups occurs randomly. So first of all, we have what we refer to as the experimental group. These are the young people who play the game. And in this group, we would be looking to recruit around 140 children from about 3 or 4 girls, with a roughly equal number of boys and girls. On the flip side, what we call the control group are those young people who do not have the opportunity to play the game or are not exposed to the game. Again, in each country, there would be 140 young people in this group recruited across the same 3 or 4 schools with a roughly equal number of boys and girls. So a total of 280 participants in each of the countries. So assuming a particular partner country was to recruit from 4 different schools, this is what it would look like. 70 students across each of the schools with a roughly equal number belonging to the experimental and control groups. And what happens is that the experimental group complete a baseline survey first thing on Monday morning. And this baseline survey assesses things such as knowledge of the behaviours that count as abuse, attitudes towards violence against women or girls, and empathetic concern for victims. of violence as well. Then immediately after completing that initial survey, they go on to play the game for 5 consecutive days. So each of the countries, the game consists of 5 chapters, and each chapter takes approximately 30 minutes to play. So they play 1 chapter for 5 consecutive days. The duration that it takes to play each chapter can vary, anywhere from sort of 20 to 40 minutes, depending on previous gaming experience. Then immediately after completing the final chapter on the Friday, they will complete exactly the same survey again. They complete the same survey 1 week later, and again 4 weeks later. Now, the control group are completing exactly the same surveys at exactly the same time points. However, they are not exposed to the gaming intervention, and instead they participate in their normal schooling curriculum. As for how we analyse the data, we adopt something known as a mixed factorial design. So we look at changes in attitudes from the first to the second to the third to the fourth survey in both of the groups, as well as examining differences in the attitudes between the experimental and control group, therefore enabling us to establish whether participation in the gaming group is actually associated with positive attitude change in the expected directions. So thank you for listening, and I will now hand over to my colleagues in Uganda, who are actually going to talk about the reality of conducting these trials in their country.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I welcome you to this session entitled Trials and Tribulations, Conducting Randomized Controlled Trials, or RCTs, During a Pandemic. I am called Esther Namfuka-Kaule. I am the Research Fellow of the Ni3 project based here at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. And I'm here to represent Team Uganda in sharing our experiences of conducting a game trial during the COVID-19 pandemic and its associated restrictions and deleterious effects, in this case, on the education sector. This presentation builds on Catherine's introduction to the game trials in Uganda. She has already talked about the methodology and the changes we had to make to accommodate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and other structural issues, as she has already elaborated. Here I build on this by providing deeper insights into the challenges Team Uganda encountered while conducting the trial in the context of the pandemic, and how we were able to navigate them to successfully execute the trial. So these are the 2 themes that the presentation focuses on: the challenges we faced and how we improvised and strategized to navigate them. But before we get into the specifics of the 2 themes, I would like to show you some scenes in the game and the typical setup of the trial. First, the game we trailed is named Peace and derives its name after the lead protagonist, a 15-year-old girl named Peace. The game was designed as an educational tool to empower young people to address child marriage, and it has 5 chapters, with each playing out in different scenes. Now, this is the interface of the first chapter of the game, which plays out in the home scene, and this is still the home scene where chapter 1 and part of chapter 5 play out, while this is the market scene where chapter 2 and 3 play out. There are other scenes where chapter 4 and part of chapter 5 also play out. Now, this is a picture of some of the children playing the game during the trial. So this was the typical setup. And you can also see here in another school, some children playing the game. So what were we faced with when we decided to proceed with the trial in Uganda, even as our partner countries were either cancelling or postponing their trials? Of course, we had a lot of hurdles. And the first one was the uncertainty about how long the schools will remain open. So at the time, we conducted the trial in April, and precisely April 26th, 2021, this year, schools had reopened for a few classes, with the priority being given to candidate classes. So while the incidence of COVID-19 in the country was low at the time, there were fears that the second wave was looming. So we were not sure if we would be able to complete all the scheduled activities in time before schools closed. And then secondly, because of the same reason of few classes being in school at the time, there were few children within the target age group, which is 14 to 17 in school at the time. So we had to be extremely creative to ensure that as we enrolled participants, we covered the broad range of that age group, because some of the classes where these children, the specific ages were not in school at that time. Then we were also dealing with an unpredictable school calendar. So the children had been out of school for a year, and the Ministry of Education was constantly revising the calendar to ensure that different classes were in school at a time. So they were phasing to manage the numbers and congestion in the schools. So this was a way of enabling the schools to use the few resources they had. Like if less classes were in the school, they had more rooms to create more streams per class, and therefore have fewer learners per room. Now, because of this, it was difficult for us to project whether some of the participants would be in school when we returned for the final survey. Like Catherine has explained, we had 4 surveys to conduct. The first one, a baseline before gameplay, then a second one immediately after gameplay, then a third a week later, and then a fourth a month after gameplay. And indeed, while we had chosen the participants on the basis of the current calendar, okay, so we were sure that we would be able to have them until the end, during the trial, the calendar for senior threes who were part of our study was abruptly changed, and the ministry had its own reasons, so they shortened their stay in school to allow another class to report. And this was one of the reasons that triggered changes in the study design, as Catherine has explained. Then it was also impossible for us to secure the preferred time slots for the trial, and mainly because the schools had an intensive schedule of catching up. Remember, the children had lost time for almost a full year, during the first lockdown. Now, our plan was to do the trials first thing in the morning before students started lessons, okay? But when we approached the schools, all of them rejected our request and instead offered us late evening hours from 3 p.m. Now, in the Ugandan context, schools normally close at around 4:30 p.m. So we essentially had only 2 hours, so from 3 to 5, to conduct the trial, because the school had to close for the children to be able to get home in time, and also us, because there was a curfew to beat. And because of the limited time, the first day was particularly difficult for us because it had a lot of activities. We had to administer the assent form, then the survey, then the whole mobilization of selected participants to put them together was a hassle, and they were in different classes. So mobilization took almost 30 minutes. Then we started assenting, then we took them through the survey. By the time we finished these preliminary activities, it was already 4:30. So we essentially had 30 minutes. Now, we decided that we start off the game so that the learners can get acquainted and see how far it could go. And because we had less laptops, we had 38 players and 19 laptops, we had to allow them to play in shifts. So the first 19 always played first, then we brought in the second shift, after sanitizing the laptops. But now what happened on the first day, we found that many of the learners, first of all, had never seen a laptop. 2, had never played a video game or a computer game, okay? So they were very, very slow. And of course, the 30 minutes were not enough. By the time they were getting acquainted, then the time elapsed. So essentially, nobody completed chapter 1 on day 1. And this meant that, we had lost a full day, and it became impossible for us to finish gameplay in the scheduled 5 days, especially for the first 2 schools that we went to. So fortunately, we used this experience, and the administrators of the last 2 batch of schools that we handled were understanding when we shared our experience in the first school. So they were a bit more flexible. So for the 2 schools, we were able to finish in time. Then the issue of computer labs, or what we may call maybe space generally. Okay, we also had some challenges with getting space for the game trial to be conducted. Now, when we were planning and engaging the schools in 2019, when the process started, the plan was to put the children in the computer labs. All the 4 schools had computer labs because these had reliable power sources. But when COVID came in, it became complicated because the computer labs of the 4 schools are a bit small and not well aerated. Okay, so they were a no-go area for us because we had to comply with the SOPs. So the alternative venues they were offering us were the main halls, but some of the days these were being used for exams. So at the time we went, the final exams for candidates were running. Of course, this is not business as usual. Normally these exams are run between October and December each year. But because we had lost a whole year, they had been moved to around April. And of course, we had selected April because we know that it was an appropriate time according to the normal school calendar. But COVID-19 came and interfered with the whole schedule. So they had to find alternative rooms. But the other rooms did not have power sources. And why? Because the administrators normally disable them to quote them, minimize wastage of power by students. So as I'll explain later, we had to find ways of, getting the power sources and ensuring that our laptops were charged throughout gameplay. Then the other hurdle was the issue of ethical and administrative clearance, because it became more complicated and tedious because of the pandemic. So the IRB required us to develop well-detailed COVID-19 management plans. This is not something that we usually do. And then when it came to the local authorities, because we needed administrative clearance as well, as some of you may be aware, in Uganda, there are 2 stages. You first get ethical clearance from the IRB. So the IRB is the first stage, and once you get that, then you move on to the final approval, which is administrative in this case. So, and we have the Uganda National Council for Science and Technology, which provides the final approval, but it only does so after you have obtained clearance, administrative clearance from the local authorities of where you're going to conduct a study. So we had to convince these people to accept us to access the schools. Many of them were skeptical and a bit adamant because they were not sure about how it would all play out. So it took us several meetings, several presentations and engagements back and forth for us to get cleared. And this partly delayed the trial in the city, in the schools within the city, because the city is always complex. They took longer to give us the permission that we needed to proceed. Then the other issue was school attendance of the children being affected. And we found that this was because of the economic impact of the pandemic on the livelihoods of households within Uganda. So many of the children who had been enrolled, okay, not very many, but some, if I may say, some of the children who were enrolled for our study, kept were absent sometimes they were around, sometimes they were not around. So they missed some of the key steps, like they did the baseline survey, all of them were there. And then some were supposed to play the game throughout, but on the final day, some of them did not turn up, or they came on the first day and then took 2 days. So in the second schools, we were able to manage those issues, but in the first schools, it was particularly difficult because we had already lost time, okay? But I'll explain how we handled some of those issues. And many of these also talked about the difficulties of, raising daily transport fares to come to school. So this also contributed to some absenteeism. And then we also had to mobilize additional resources to be able to comply with the COVID-19 SOPs. We had revised our budgets to cater for the trial way back in 2019 and had a smaller budget than we eventually used. Now, this was because we had to cater for both the research team, the students, and the teachers we were directly working with. And this blew up the budget. So we had to buy masks, we had to buy sanitizer, we had to buy face shields, and then we also got a token to support the school to comply with COVID-19 SOPs as well. This was our way of promoting equity, because we knew that the children participating in the trial will have access to sanitizer, and yet the rest of the school may actually not have access to sanitizer. So we were more deliberate and decided that we would give a token to each of the participating schools to help them ensure that they procure the necessary materials, so that we do not have an imbalanced situation while we were working in the schools. And we had to cater for all these three entities, the team, the students, and the teachers, because in our context, the burden of ensuring compliance to the COVID-19 SOPs is always placed on the researcher. So the RBs advise that we provide these things directly, like in this case, the masks and sanitizers to the participants, because in reality, chances are high that you may actually go there and find that they don't have them because of the economic situation of the majority of our population. So you don't take chances. You have to integrate the issues in the budget. Now, how did we go about navigating the host of challenges that I have highlighted to successfully pull off the study? Now, the first and foremost was the issue of flexibility. We had to exercise very high levels of flexibility. And as I'm going to explain, all the key stakeholders had to be flexible, starting with the funder, then us, the research team, then the schools, then the children themselves, and then the parents. So, and these are some of the ways that we exercised flexibility. So the first was the study design itself having to be modified to reduce the number of surveys from 4 to 3, as Catherine has already explained. So as I've indicated earlier, some of the participants had to leave school earlier than anticipated because the Ministry of Education changed the calendar. But also, remember, we lost some time in the first set of schools, so which means we needed more time to be able to go back for the fourth survey, and which would push us further into June, not May as we had anticipated. Okay? And of course, the work had to continue, so we couldn't continue with the original plan. And then the budgets had to be reworked to find more money. And of course, at the Ni3 headquarters, the funder, like I've indicated, the budget significantly increased because of integrating compliance with the COVID-19 SOPs. And then locally, we had to accommodate unplanned costs. And one of them, or one of the biggest costs, was the issue of power. So the rooms we eventually got did not have power sources. So we needed a couple of extension cables, first of all, to pull the power from the nearest source and then bring it to the room and then distribute the power to all the laptops. And then we also had to revise our plans to fit in the available time slots, because the schools could not give us our desired slots of morning hours. We had to be flexible and fit in what was available. Otherwise, the study would not have been possible. And then we also always went to the schools earlier, an hour earlier. This helped us to set up But also we had discovered that some of the children were actually free at that time before our official time. And so we would go earlier and encourage especially the slow ones to come early if they are free, and then we'll be able to get more time to play, even 2 chapters to catch up. So by the time other people came, we still had enough time for everybody to play and then finish in time. Then the schools also had to rework their time schedules to accommodate us. Like I've indicated, especially in the first set of schools, we ended up needing more time than we had initially bargained for. Okay, and of course now this ended up interfering with the school program. But the school administrators were gracious enough to allow us to have an extra day. And in some of the schools, these were weekends, like I'm about to explain. And one of the extreme cases was a school where exams had to be shifted, to allow us to take up a day. And then, like I've already said, we also negotiated to work on weekends where it was agreeable to the administrators. And this meant that they had to write to the parents of the children to allow them to come to school on the weekends. And the weekends were particularly helpful because we could work longer uninterrupted. So the children who were behind could play 2 chapters to be able to catch up. And that's how we managed to ensure that as many children completed all the 5 chapters of the game. Then the direct involvement of the school administration in running the trial. Yeah, they were completely immersed. They always came around to ensure that everything was okay. They were monitoring to see how the children are coping, but also they gave us a particular teacher to help in mobilizing the participants on a day-to-day basis. And this teacher was supposed to stay with us until we left every day. Okay? And they were always there. So these teachers were able to see the challenges we were facing at first hand, which made it easier for them to convince the school administrations to make concessions to us. And for instance, allowing us to come earlier, we talked about this and we negotiated with the school with the help of these teachers who are our advocates, and then also working on weekends. Then elsewhere, we got an extra day in the first set of schools because we had lost the first year. And of course, it was our first experience. So we were also caught unawares. We hadn't realized that actually the schedule would be too heavy and ultimately we would not be able to finish within the allocated time. And then, so of course, we've already talked about the continuous engagement of schools. So as they were directly involved, we were also continuously engaging them to bend rules here and there for us. Then we also gave incentives to schools and teachers who directly supported the trial. So we knew that it was a difficult time. By the time we were planning to go to the field, the schools had a lot of pressure. The teachers had a lot of pressure. They had to catch up. They had to ensure the candidates finish their classes. They had to finish whatever they were supposed to cover within the allocated time period, then to bring in new learners. So as we were planning to provide these incentives, and this was planned with our partners, the funders, and work package 4 leads in the UK. So we talked about it and decided that we need to do something. So as we provided these incentives, okay, our motive was to recognize the difficulties the schools and teachers were facing, but also compensating them for the inconvenience the whole trial had caused, and to appreciate their support towards the project. So, and these are some of the things we provided. We provided a monetary token, like I've already explained, to support schools' implementation of COVID-19 SOPs. But of course, this was also driven by the virtue of equity to ensure that we did not have an imbalanced situation while we were in schools. And then we also donated the laptops we used in the trial to the schools, and even encouraged that the 3 administrators could take the 3, 1, 2, 3, the head teacher and the 2 deputies could pick 3 laptops to support them in their administrative work, because we had learned that they actually do not have computers, and yet they have to do a lot of writing and documentation. So paperwork was really burdening them. And then for the teachers who supported us, we had a modest fee per day to compensate for their time. And we were fortunate enough that these tokens, or what you may call incentives, were extremely motivating to the school administrators and the teachers. They were happy, to support us. They actually saw the tokens as symbols of our care. Okay, and I remember one head teacher I interacted with remarking, as a public school, we are obliged to allow universities to conduct research in the school. But many of you come and go without caring about the many sacrifices we make to support your research. We really appreciate this gesture. We know we are dealing with people who truly care about us. Okay, so this statement, of course, is very heavy, and you can see that to them, the incentives or the packages we were giving were actually symbols that we cared about them. It was not about us, getting our research done and we move on to the next chapter, but we also cared about their situation and their well-being. So perhaps it is not surprising that we received all the support we needed to make the trial successful. Okay, so like I've already indicated, they even had to make extreme decisions such as shifting exams to another date to enable us to complete the trial in time. And then we also oversampled to make up for possible cases of dropout and non-completion of the study due to absenteeism or other factors. So the minimum sample, according to the calculation, was 168, but we sampled 304 children, and this eventually enabled us to be able to make up for the children who did not complete. And there were quite a number who were either not there for the second survey or did not finish the 5 chapters of the game, because even when we created room for catch up, like working over the weekend, they could not come. So ultimately we were able to have a good number of participants in the trial. So as I conclude, I can confidently say that the factors that made it possible for us to pull off the trial in a precarious situation were mainly 3. And the first one being flexibility of all stakeholders, like I have explained. Honestly, if we had not been flexible, or the funder, or the schools, or the children and parents, then it would not have been possible for us to pull off the trial successfully as we did. And then the second element was the strong relationships we had with the school administrators. Okay? And I think the different engagements and how they were making concessions can all attest to how strong those relationships were. And I can arguably say that the incentives we provided, which were our ways of recognizing their situation and contributing to their well-being, cemented these relationships. So I would say those are the main factors that can explain how we managed to pull off the trial within the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, we also have to talk about our resilience as a team, and I would say the resilience of the program, because they were able to even tweak budgets here and there to be able to find the money, even when we had not initially, thought that we would need these resources. So thank you so much for listening to me. That is all I had. I wish you a nice evening or morning or afternoon. Any questions are welcome.